So today we are going to be talking about mobile app development trends in 2021. We are very happy to have here Vincent, who is the CEO of Massive Infinity. He's a technopreneur. He has done a lot of companies with a lot of experience in the development of mobile applications, pretty much the full spectrum. That means all the way from maybe native to progressive web apps to maybe hybrid apps as well. So let us welcome Vincent. He'll tell us a bit more about his experiences today, and take it away, Vincent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny, for the kind introduction. I think before I begin, I also like to introduce briefly what we do, because there'll be some case studies and examples that I have within my sharing that will actually come from our company. So today we'll be talking about mobile app development trends in 2021. All right. So I'm the CEO of Massive Infinity, and what we do is we are a venture builder. We basically help companies to actually develop their products. And of course, that could range from mobile app related products to even IoT related ones. So we do spin-off as well, and we work with startups, and we have things in the infrastructure IoT space, like Allocate space, as well as energy tech, which is what Pylon City does, right? So all these different things that we do, all right, we kind of realize that even if you have an IoT application, you definitely need to have a mobile app to build interface with it, right? Because that's currently our primary means of interacting with data. So what we see is that there is a current state of mobile app development that we are seeing today, and that is the spectrum, all the way from progressive web app, web-based, mobile view, as well as hybrid and native. So we'll walk through a bit on the tech itself to compare, because obviously there'll be pros and cons between each of the different tech stack. And then we'll go into the key trends that we observe today in mobile app development. And if time permits, we can do a little bit of Q&A as well. All right, so for the state of mobile app development. So in the early days when we talk about mobile, all right, I think the very first things that people do with mobile is the fact that you have a mobile browser. And on a mobile browser, just by simply having the ability to be mobile responsive, right? A lot of websites are able to, put their app in a web view, and then you can actually see them, immediately on your browser. Now, the problem with that, of course, is in the earlier days, if you're just using a browser alone, right, and the browser APIs are not that tightly connected, right, to the operating system level of the phone. So as a result of that, a lot of these things that you're doing is more of a web view only, right? And that's why people started to focus a lot more on the other end of the spectrum, which is native, right? Because in native, with all your pure native component, you can go down to the device level, work with the gyroscope, with the accelerometer, and literally use what the phone literally has to offer, all right, in order to create your app. Now, the problem with that is that you will end up having to then create your app for more than one ecosystem, right? Because you have the iOS ecosystem, which you're using Swift to code in. And of course, you have the Android ecosystem, which you normally use Java to code in. This, of course, gives rise to a cost and time issue, right? Because you would then need to have an iOS developer as well as an Android developer, and you need to concurrently develop and maintain two separate code bases, right? So in a way, we are lucky that Microsoft didn't manage to squeeze themselves in, because otherwise you will have a third platform, to actually worry about, right? And just by having two platforms alone is really that much to handle, right? So that is one of the issues with native. So what happened next was that people started thinking, well, if we could actually do away with having to maintain two code bases, could we simply have a framework in which we can hybridize the app? Right, so just by maintaining one single code base, hiring one single kind of engineer with a single skill set, all right, we could actually deploy the app to both platforms without compromising too much of the feature set, right? So that gives rise to what we call the hybrid app that you see today. Of course, in the beginning, all right, this was initially pioneered, all right, by Cordova, all right, as you can see here, which are like plugins that we use to try and wrap your native components onto a native interface, right? And of course, Adobe, all right, took that, all right, took over that project, and that became the project known as PhoneGap, right? And similarly, Ionic as well. In the earlier days, purely web views that were wrapped into a mobile app structure. So to the end users, when you deploy it, it's still like a mobile app, right? You still got to get it from the App Store and everything, but it is primarily still using a web app. So there's a lot of problems with that because you couldn't actually access certain things that's native. So how the hybrid app changes it is that rather than actually doing it as just a web view, they look at each of the individual components. Say, for example, if there's a calendar component that is native, right, they are able to create a framework to wrap it around, for example, in JavaScript, all right? So that gives rise to your React Native framework, your native script framework, where you could literally have a wrapped version of each component that is native and yet not in its native language, right? So that's how the hybrid app system came about. Now, as a result of that, all right, you will realize that hybrid apps using this native component wrapping method is far superior than simply just wrapping the entire web view into a mobile app, because that is still a pseudo app, right? So as a result of that, last year in October 2020, Adobe officially gave up, right? So they say they are abandoning the PhoneGap project, and in fact, Ionic themselves have already migrated, right? And they're now, having the framework called Ionic Native, right? Which is quite similar to native script, right? In terms of the JavaScript-based native components, right? So we see that the trend today now is that if you're doing a mobile web, it's simply just a website, right? People are no longer thinking about doing an app wrap around a web view. Instead, everyone is moving towards building hybrid apps. And the reason is quite obvious from a business point of view, because there's a lot of cost saving and time saving involved, right? Now, JavaScript isn't the only way in which you can develop this hybrid app. So if you're not looking at React Native, NativeScript, Ionic Native, right, there's other things that you can look at like Kotlin or Flutter, and of course Flutter is using Dart, or Xamarin. Xamarin is using the Microsoft stack, so they're using your .NET modules, C#, etc. Right, so it doesn't have to be just JavaScript alone. Now, hybrid app has been working pretty well, right, to a certain extent, because it still gives you quite a lot of native functionality, right? Now, the issues here is that people are beginning to be, quite sick and tired of having yet another mobile app to download, right? So imagine having to always download another app, and after a while, your phones be so cluttered with apps. People just do not want to download yet another app. So that gives rise to a new kind of web application, which we call the progressive web app, right? So the difference between a progressive web app and your normal mobile web app, which is simply just a responsive web view, is the use of components and service worker, right? Because as a result of that, the life cycle of this app begins as a pure website, but the moment you decide that you want to actually so-called bookmark or install it, it can transition itself into an actual app, right? And can even have offline functionality just like an actual app, right? So it kind of becomes like the best of both worlds, right? And because of this sticky nature, all right, that is able to actually bypass the App Store and the Play Store, initially only Google was promoting it, right? But after a while, Apple quietly actually allowed this to happen, all right? They didn't make a lot of fanfare when they announced it, but from iOS 11 onwards, all right, actually, if you encounter a PWA-enabled website, you could actually install the PWA onto your iOS phone as well. So some examples of this kind of application. So Dr. Wealth is one of the clients of ours. I think some of you are into understanding, wealth management and understanding how to go into investment. You'll probably be aware of Dr. Wealth, all right? So they're into the realms of education, all right, on financial related matters. So we work together with them to actually create a progressive web app, right? Primarily because of the use case, right? Because if you are looking at this from a education and a discovery point of view, all right, and this is not a stock, exchange or of a stock buying kind of an app, it's not your eToro, it's not your brokerage kind of application. So as a result of that, you can't expect people to actually want to download this kind of app, right? So progressive web app is perfect, right, for this particular example, because they will then, first discover, Dr. Well through the articles that they write, the blogs that they wrote, right? And then if they really, really like the content, right, they could actually decide to save it, and this becomes an app, right? Secondly, if they decide to use some of the features like the stock ticker, right, they want to actually create their own watch list, right? These are more app-like kind of a feature. The moment they decide to do that, all right, they will then have to create an account, and then that will also allow us to say that, hey, you can actually install this as an app, and then after that they can even have offline capability to track the application or the stock tickers, right, directly within the PWA. So on hybrid app example, so this is another startup that we work with, Hula. I think some of you might be quite aware of Hula. They're a buy now, pay later startup, right? So the app itself is actually a React Native app, right? So why React Native works well in such a use case is because if you look at the app itself, it doesn't have a very deep use case of integration with device level, right, sensors and things like that, right? And what you want is to push features out to market as fast as possible. So if that's the case, then a hybrid app is perfect, right? Because you maintain one single code base for both the Android and the iOS, right? And you can then, implement your account management features, your merchant-related management features, as well as your payment related management features. And for the offline in-store experience, actually React Native also allows for you to do things like QR scanning, right? Because those components are able to work with the native portion as well, right? So a hybrid app is perfect in Hula's case, all right? Now, in a native app example, all right, it really has to do with the client per se. So in our case, in MaxiCash, they are a pawn shop, right? So they want to actually make payments for the ticketing, right? Now, the app itself doesn't necessarily need to have very deep integration with IoT devices or any Bluetooth related matters. But the reason why for this particular case they have to go native is because of the underlying SDKs that they use, right? So if they're using a payment SDK, a third-party provider that only provides for native related coding, then you have no choice, right? Your app has to be native Android or native iOS, right? So it's not just about having very deep device level access. So I will just skip the video. Now, if we are to compare the different tech stack, right? Of course, there are many differences. Now, if you look at it from a mobile web app point of view, all right, your application literally sits, right at the top, all right, and you will then have, say, a mobile development framework that we use, all right, which will allow you to access all the different framework compatible libraries, and then ultimately you're just using the WebView API, right? So you're agnostic of the fact of whether you're iOS or Android, right? Because it's purely targeting web. If you look at progressive web app and compare the two, right, you can see that there is a major difference. First of all, you don't use the web view anymore, right? Instead, you're looking at everything from a service worker point of view. There's a transport layer security. And then from the service worker itself, you've noticed that it splits into two, right? You can target the browser because, as you recall, the PWA first begins its life as a website. But the moment the person saves it, right, saves this thing as an actual app, right, it goes over to what we call the application shell architecture, right? So this is dictated by a file called a manifest file, right? So that is one major difference, because the moment you implement it from the manifest file, you will so-called skip the browser, and the app, the next time you open it, you'll be running through the application shell architecture, right? So that's one major difference. Of course, the underlying operating system must support it, but as of today, both iOS and Android already support it. Of course, there are some slight differences. iOS is still lacking in terms of certain features. Like, for example, you can't do a proper push notification, right, for PWA on iOS at this point in time. Right? For Android, it's fully compatible. You can't even tell whether it's an actual native app or not. Then if you were to compare hybrid versus native, right, so as I explained earlier on, right, the difference between a hybrid versus your web-related application is the fact that you're able to wrap it at the component level rather than at the web view level. So imagine every single actual native components that you have is then wrapped around a different layer. In this case, I'm using React Native as an example. All right, so there'll be a JavaScript version of it that's wrapped around it, and there's what we call a bridge. Right, so when you have that bridge, what you're essentially doing is that you're coding everything in JavaScript, but you're relying on the fact that every phone includes ability to do JavaScript at runtime. Right, so in other words, they will take that script and you compile it, and then they will run it, on top of that as a layer, right, to interface with the native layer. Right, so the result of that is you can then actually target the application, right, at the moment of compile time to be able to work with either iOS or Android, right? So once you build the app, it's specifically iOS and specifically Android only when you build it, right? But when you're coding and when you're testing, it's purely JavaScript, right? So that's the beauty of a hybrid app. So of course, as comparison's sake, I think for those of you who are doing native, you can see that this is the more a normal way of coding, right? So you have your third-party libraries followed by your SDKs, which are given by your Google and your Apple, right? And then you will develop whatever application you have that sits on top of it. So more information about the native bridge. So this is an example of how it works. So say, for example, if you have a calendar, right? So as you know, natively, there's a calendar manager on every phone. All right, so if you basically have that calendar manager, there will definitely be an iOS version of it and the Android version of it. So the people who actually write React Native components, right, and make it available for people to use and install, they are the ones that are actually writing the bridges, right? And they will basically write the wrapping layer that goes around the native site. And it doesn't have to be JavaScript. So if you're not using React Native, for example, if you're using Flutter, the same thing happens, right? So you write it in Dart, and then you will create a Flutter version of that library. Now, of course, there are some user experience nuances that you need to consider, right? So first of all, installability, right? As I mentioned earlier on, PWA can go from the browser, but if you're talking about hybrid and native, it definitely has to come from the store. When it comes to app update, because of the nature of PWA being web first, right, that update is automatic. Right? But if you're going through hybrid or native, you definitely need to do your updates through the store, right? So you need to go through the whole store ecosystem. Promotion-wise, because it's a native app for hybrid and native, right? You can then list it on your app store and everything. But progressive web app, because you don't have the store and its first life cycle is actually the website, you need to make sure that it's still search engine friendly. Of course, push notification issue, I mentioned it before. And in terms of UI, if you're doing it for hybrid and native, you definitely need to have additional work to cater for different screen sizes. And finally, if you're talking about UI component, all right, the smoothest will definitely be pure native, all right, followed by hybrid and then progressive web app, right? And the reason being is the fact that if you're progressive web app, you're actually loading all the UI right at the beginning, all right? So definitely it's less smooth. But native, normally when you download the app, the UI is already preloaded, right? And hybrid is a half-half kind of a situation. Some tech and security consideration. So I mentioned the offline capability just now as well. And of course, device features, if you're using hybrid, it has to be through native bridge. So if someone didn't write the component for it, then you need to be the one to do it. Of course, if you're the one writing a native bridge, then you will need to have iOS and Android knowledge. And of course, if you're looking at battery life, pure native definitely drains the least, right? And the reason why, like hybrid app, progressive web app, drains the most, right? It's because of render time, right? Because when you're loading the app and you're loading the things yourself, because of the JavaScript runtime as well as the browser rendering and everything, you will eat up more battery life, right? So that is the major difference. Of course, in terms of security, we look at the number of attack surfaces which you can attack. Obviously, if you are pure native, you've got less attack surface. That's the reason why it'd be more secure, right? But that doesn't mean that just by relatively being less secure, it's not secure at all. It's just a matter of the amount of things that you need to look into, right, when you're securing the app. So in terms of resource and cost consideration, definitely, if you have to compare this in terms of cost, native is the costliest. And of course, if you go down the spectrum, all right, progressive web app will be cheapest and the fastest. Of course, if you're looking at very specific features to your platform on Apple and Android, then in-app payment, all right, there's the commission structure to take note of. And of course, if you're launching, in the App Store, you can leverage on the promo codes, right? Same for Google as well, right? You can do something similar, right? So these are the things that you will never be able to do if you're doing your PWA or your web-based application. Now that we have sort of gone through the whole spectrum of app development as well as the kind of examples of how you can actually deploy it depending on the pros and cons of the tech stack, let's see what kind of key trends that we can expect, especially in this post-COVID world. I think one of the major trends that we see today is that a lot of the app design, all right, are undergoing a lot of simplification, mainly because we are seeing a lot of advances in AI, ML, and what we call voice user interfaces, right? Because if you could talk to your app, if you can have a very smart app that can look through the eyes of the camera, right, and as well as to hear your voice, actually you do not need that many buttons in the first place, right? Because input buttons are actually a quite unnatural way for humans to interact, right? So you can see because of this, a lot of apps like, for example, Google Lens and even your Shazam, you can actually make use of all this to reduce, and simplify how your app works, right? And I think this is actually going to be the key major trend that's going to happen. The other thing is, of course, IoT, right? Right now, we have more devices connected to the internet than humans are, right? And of course, because of wearables as well, all of us have your Fitbit or your iWatch as well, right? So with all these different devices you have, primarily all these devices still need to connect to an application, and that'll be a phone, right? So say, for example, one of our clients, which is doing this device called Spider ECG, all right? It basically measures your heart electrocardiogram, but there'll be no way they can use this if they do not have an application, right, to actually visualize it, right? So as a result of that, you will find that a lot of applications today, people are finding a real need for them to always interface with the device, right? And smart home is the other trend as well, right? You can look at it in terms of your Dyson app, as well as your MyD-Link app, or even a Tuya smart home app, right? It's going to increase, which means that a lot of developers, right, when they're doing applications, they need to have a lot of understanding on how to work with IoT, right? And most of these actually have to be done on native, right? So this will be understanding on how Bluetooth low energy works, how to use your Bluetooth low energy manager, or even NFC as well, right? As some of the application evolves. And because of COVID, all right, we have a proliferation of contact tracing, BLE beacons, and we find that becomes very important. But actually, even before the whole contact tracing thing came about, BLE beacons has been primarily used for a lot of situations, right? So I think you've probably seen some of these things like Tao or Chipolo being sold in stores, right? These are literally trackers or tags that you basically tag to everyday items like your keys, your wallet, or your bag, all right, where you can actually use it to find things that you have forgotten, where you have placed them, right, using Bluetooth low energy. Right? Of course, now it's extended, we are tagging people now, right, just to see whether, we have come into close contact with each other, right? But because of that, right, these beacons can also be used in indoor wayfinding, right? Because your GPS can't work as well in indoors, especially if you are dealing with a retail mall with multiple levels, right? So, some of our clients like Changi Airport Group, we have to deploy like BLE beacons for them, and using the mobile app, you can actually use it to navigate around and even use it as a way, all right, to give you like very targeted, advertisement, right, by the merchants when you come into close proximity. Of course, the other trend is augmented reality and virtual reality, right? I think in the beginning, we noticed that most of our clientele look at it from a marketing point of view, right? So for example, like Meiji, right? We did this for their Hello Panda biscuit, as an anniversary thing, right? So using the app, you can point at it and you have a panda that comes out, so it's more of a marketing kind of a play. But beyond marketing, there's a lot of other use cases for it, right? Because you could do AR navigation, you can do AR shopping, like this example over here. You can even do it for an education point of view, right? So we did this for like Indian Heritage Center, right? You can replace it with your museum tour guide using an AR version of it. You can do it for a virtual tour, right? Because in Changi's case, you know, before they actually have to build your jewel as well as your kinetic ray and all the things that you see at Changi Airport today, they needed a way to visualize these things, right? Even before it's built. So a very good way to do that is to create an application with augmented reality tour. So you could literally bring stakeholders, you know, along on this tour and look at your jewel and your kinetic rain or your koi garden even before you build them, right? So this gives stakeholders an idea of what's going into the project and what's about to happen if you actually build this whole thing out, right? So that's one of the beauty of having augmented reality. And of course, not to neglect virtual reality, these are perfect for you know, induction programs and primary in education as well, virtual reality education and even entertainment, right? I think pre-COVID times, you know, you might probably even enjoy going to places like zero latency, where you enjoy like a VR game, you know, shooting zombies, you know, and I think VR gaming centers are literally the land shops of the future, right? They are replacing all the land shops that you see today. And of course, we are now in the middle of a current blockchain and cryptocurrency bull run, all right? And not to neglect blockchain, because right now we're beginning to see the rise of what we call decentralized apps, right? And today, I think most of the apps are now surrounding the cryptocurrency point of view first, right? Because that is where the initial use case are, right? So you can see that most of the dApps that you see today are in fact DeFi, right? Decentralized finance, as well as wallets, right? Of course, and there are more centralized apps like your exchange apps, right? But in time to come, I would say that the dApps will progress beyond just DeFi as well as a financial point of view, right? Because dApps actually have a lot of implications, right? You can do a lot of smart contract-related applications that go with it, right? You can use it to manage contracts, say from a property tech point of view as well. And of course, with the recent craze of non-fungible token, NFTs, right? Where you could literally tie a virtual object, right, to something that is unique, right? That will actually open up a lot of doorways, right? Because earlier on, if you, in the previous slide, we talked about AR. So imagine, right, if you're able to do, like in this picture over here, this so far doesn't really exist, right? But imagine if you're able to do like NFT-based AR art gallery, you can basically have a virtualized artwork that's being displayed everywhere, right? You can have dApps that can be used to display an NFT, and you can literally be living in a real and unreal kind of a world, right? And everything will then, you know, that is virtual can actually have value behind it as well, right? So this is very new, but I think this is where the direction is going to be heading. And of course, mobile wallet is definitely here to stay. And I think mobile wallet will evolve beyond just the wallet per se, but because of all the changes that's happening in banking, right? I think with the virtual banking license being given out in Singapore as well, a lot of the mobile wallets will kind of evolve beyond just the wallet use case, but also they involve some of the banking use case, right? So I think that is where the trend is going, right? So for instance, you can see that in GrabPay point of view, all right, already you're beginning to see sort of like interactions between apps, right? Because right now you can use GrabPay with your Fave Pay, right? Even though they're sort of like payment of each other, but then Fave kinds of focus a lot more on your deals and your cashback, right? So you're going to begin to see a lot of more interoperability, right, between a payment application, right? And we are already beginning to see that with other apps like Payla as well, right? So I think that's going to be the trend. Right, so in time to come, people will definitely have more than one wallets in your system. And I wouldn't discount the fact that future applications, you know, clientele will actually be wanting to build their own wallet, right? And a lot of payment gateways are already including SDKs to allow for everybody to create their own wallets, right? And having wallet interoperability. And of course, why would everyone want all these wallets? Because before these wallet systems, you can imagine having this inbuilt into your mobile commerce. You can then have a very O2O, online to offline kind of experience, right? So in the case of Sephora or even Uniqlo, right? You can have a mixture of both an in-store walk-in experience as well as an online shopping experience, all within the same mobile interface, right? So what this means is that in time to come, everyone who is dealing with mobile app development will then need to think of how to actually engage both the online and physical world, right, using that one mobile app interface, right? And of course, you have your marketplaces, like Lazada, Shopee, and of course Carousel as well. And then gaming is another big thing that is trending and happening. All right. So I think in gaming point of view, all right, it's because games are classified between something that is very time consuming and something that you spend a lot of time to play, and those are more serious games. But there are other kinds of games where you tend to actually play them in your free time when you're, say, for example, waiting for someone, or if you have nothing better to do at that point in time. And these are what we call hyper-casual games, right? And in recent years, we have seen a rise in hyper-casual games tied to loyalty system to rewards, right? So you might have seen, for example, in Lazada, there's a proliferation of games, right? You can play a lot of the different Lazada games, and these games literally help you earn points. And these points are translatable, to real, actual money, all right? And looking at some of our clientele like Royal Caribbean and CapitaLand, all right? And in pre-COVID times, we launch a game for them nearly every year, all right? And if you use their mobile app, which is Capital Star app, right, you can actually play these games and earn points, right? And these games help as a way to incentivize customers, right, to actually do certain tasks, right? So say, for example, back in 2019, before COVID hit us, we got this game where we collaborated with Line, right? You could actually do certain tasks like buy certain items of a certain basket size, like $50 or so, and that will literally give you a stamp, right, on a virtual passport, so to speak, within the game interface itself. And in doing so, this unlocks certain rewards for you. So this gamification of the loyalty reward system is what people are looking for, and it increases engagement, right? Which is what the merchants as well as the retailers, and the property owners like CapitaLand are looking for, right? And I think this trend is here to stay. Just that with COVID, the gaming portion has now shifted more towards online marketplaces, right? That's focusing a lot more on that. But I think in time to come, if you are into app development, I wouldn't discount the fact that other people will also ask for that. Hey, if you are doing an app, is there a way in which you could add gamification elements, even if it's not a game, all right, into the app development user experience itself? I talked a bit about the m-commerce just now. I was alluding to the fact that if you have a mobile app as the primary interface, you could actually lead to O2O, right? So in O2O, what we are literally looking for is what we call omnichannel retail, right? Because in retail today, we do not see it as coming from just one channel alone, which is the storefront, right? So in the beginning, definitely, people talk about having to go online, going to the website or going to the mobile app, and you do your shopping over there, right? But these days, people don't just shop online, right? There are certain things where you can shop online because, well, probably you're very certain what the size is, in terms of fashion, what's your clothing size or your shoe size. But when it comes to the touch and the feel, that is something your online experience alone can never replicate, right? So as a result of that, right, you will definitely still end up, going down to the store, all right? And if you go down to the store, then this gives rise to a few more interaction points, right? Because you will then have things like kiosks in the store, as well as the actual store itself, all right? So what would then happen is that people will be asking and saying that, hey, if you already have a mobile app, can the mobile app actually work in store as well, right? So if I'm getting reward points, for example, can the same reward points be translatable if I am walking into the store and just buying a Uniqlo clothing, all right, off the shelf, right? It has to work both ways, right? So as a result of that, you're beginning to see that trend happening where people could do this in several combinations, right? They could either walk in the store, buy the things they want, and then they use the app to earn rewards from it, or they could actually start the experience from online first, buy, and then maybe go to the store to do a pickup, Or they could do both, right? They can either buy on the online or buy in the store and then have it delivered to maybe a locker, right, in which they can then collect it, right? So this is a different collection point altogether, right? So there's a lot of different combinations, right, of how this omni-channel sales could happen. And even in the case of, say, Challenger, for example, right? If you walk in a Challenger store and you buy something from Challenger, right, they will ask you whether you are on their value app program or not. Are you a member? Right, and then they will ask you whether you could open the app and then you can scan the QR, right, and then they will basically record down the amount of points you have or whether there's any member discount that you have. But that same interface and that same point system and membership system must work on their online marketplace as well, which is Hachitech, right? So the two of them are literally two different channels of the same merchant, of the same retail experience, right? So if you are the app developer for Challenger, value app, for example, that is where your so-called challenge lies in, right? Because you would then have to actually create an app that can work for both online and offline, right? The other trend that we see today is, of course, with your in-app chat. So this is basically, I see as more of a stopgap measure in a way, because I think eventually a voice-based user interface will overtake this, right? But in the meantime, right, as a stopgap to that, we are beginning to see a proliferation of what we call in-app chat, right? So today, if you look at every single app out there, be it a banking app or even the Capital Star retail, shopping mall mobile app, all of them has a chat within the app, right? And the reason why they want to do that is because with that chat within the app, they can immediately get user engagement, user feedback, and interact with the users, and find out a lot of information from users, where they are, where they're actually using the app itself. Now, of course, this gives rise to a different challenge, because if you've got thousands of users and they're all chatting with you, how do you manage that many users humanly, right? So as a result of that, a lot of this in-app chat, if you're implementing in-app chat, normally what they will then do is to implement a chatbot to go along with it, right? So that your first line of contact will be with the chatbot, so that the chatbot can literally answer some of the more common questions first, and of course even sieve out, some of those questions that could be already answered because you have a certain knowledge base in place, right? And you have a particular scenario that you could already envision, right? So that leaves you with things that your chatbot couldn't answer, and that is where the human can come in, and eventually how the humans answer, can actually be brought back into the system, and then the learnings from that can be incorporated in the chatbot, which means that actually over time, right, the system becomes more and more independent of the human, right? So that is the advantage of having this in-app chat and chatbot. Now, this is something that, of course, without the in-app chat, it's going to be rather difficult, because if the chat interface is outside of the app, all right, like for example, if you're just maintaining a WhatsApp so-called helpline, then you wouldn't be able to capture this information, right? Which is why what some of them are beginning to do is they're beginning to leverage on some of these independent messaging apps APIs, right? So in the case of like Telegram or Messenger, where they allow for the API access, you can then have the same common chatbot, running on both the Telegram as well as on Facebook Messenger, right? So you have a common way of gathering data and information, right, back to your knowledge base, right? So this is quite advantageous in your app development. And of course, we now know as well that 5G is along the way as well. We are beginning to have a rollout of 5G, and 5G will have a very, very big impact, all right? And how 5G will impact us is, first of all, we must run through, all right, how the different generations of connectivity has actually enabled certain things, okay? So bear with me a bit. Now, if you look at the little boxes over there on the bottom right, okay, if you recall back in the earlier days, if you're talking about the first few generation, right, of connectivity, your 1G, enabled only simply phone calls, right? Because you've that small little bandwidth that you have, the most you could do is having that phone call. But once we are able to increase that pipe, all right, we will then be able to introduce things like your SMSs and little internet connections. In the past, we used to call it GPRS, those kind of connection, which are very small data sets and data packets that you can send across. But the moment we reached 3G, all right, where we could start sending things like MMS, all right, and then we can have full-fledged web application, right? That totally changed the game, right? In fact, I would argue that because of 3G, it allows for companies like Apple, which used to be in the computing space and not in the phone space itself, right, to actually come into that space, right? Because prior to that, Nokia was the leader, right, in that space. And of course, there's BlackBerry as well. But by having 3G coming into the picture, and then having someone who is actually originally from the computing space and the software space itself looked into this space, it means that it actually brings down the barrier quite a lot. All right. So as a result of that, you can look at it from an app-based, an app-first point of view, as well as a content-first point of view, rather than from a phone call point of view, right? So that is a major game changer. Now, the moment we reach 4G, that increases, that capability such that people are beginning to shift even further, right? So if 3G brought to you your touch phones that you see today, right, as the first line of revolution, 4G literally changes the way we work with your phone apps, right? So to give you an example, when everyone shifted to using touch-based phones, right, one of the things that it proliferated was the rise of social media, and you get the likes of Facebook, right? And then subsequently you got Instagram, and then you got your messaging app. And so much so, people now look at data more than your SMSs and your phone, right? These days, people don't even care how many SMS you're allowed to have in your price plan, or how many minutes, because you can do everything with data, right? So I believe that in time to come, people might, the telcos might even drop all these things and just do it pure data. But once 4G came about, it gives rise to the ability to do streaming, which means that user behavior will begin to change. And true enough, the newer generation are now onto things like TikTok. They're now onto Twitch. They're talking about having to do Snapchat, they're having to do Insta stories, and they're basically changing the way in which they're interacting. People no longer talk about tweeting, posting on Facebook anymore, right? People, because of this wider bandwidth, people are very willing to do live streams and all these things because it costs them near to nothing, right, to be able to do that right now. And as a result of that, today, whenever we do our mobile applications, all right, the number one things in which client asks us for is like, what kind of real-time web or technologies are you incorporating into your development? Because nearly every app development now will then involve some form of real-time messaging system, or some form of real-time streaming related kind of system, right? Because you will either have an in-app chat, or you will have a video streaming, right, or video shopping, or audio, or the most recent craze, as you can see, is like the Clubhouse app, where it's purely just audio, right, related streaming and chatting, right? So that will give rise to a demand for that. Now, where does it lead us in 5G? 5G, if you have been reading the articles and everything, it brings it to the whole new level, because the difference between 4G and 5G is the latency portion. So imagine if the latency portion has been reduced so drastically that your streaming no longer needs to buffer, all right, and your whole Netflix video, whole Netflix episode that you're downloading on your mobile app can be downloaded within seconds rather than minutes, all right, that becomes a super game changer, right? Because this could literally change the form factor of your devices, right? Which is one of the main inhibitors of AR and VR, right, in terms of your goggles. So imagine this, if you are able to do that, it means that you can offload a lot of the computing power of your application onto either edge compute kind of a scenario, or you can even basically offload it directly onto your cloud backend itself to do all that processing, right? So if you do that, then actually your mobile app code base and your size of the app and everything becomes slimmer. In fact, right, you can easily just download the app itself, right, in one single app bundle. And at the same time, it gives rise to a different use case of app, right? Because your app can then be even downloaded in sequence, which is what's happening right now. Because Google just rolled out the app bundle, right, which is their new way of packaging rather than an APK. So how that works is that they can now even allow you to layer your app such that the first version, the first part of the app that you download is the base and the core, but you can actually choose not to download the rest of the parts to it. And you can basically download it only, when you start using the rest of the app, right? So that allows you to literally start using the app even before the app is fully downloaded, all right? So as a result of that, they even got things like Insta app, where you can try the app even before downloading it, right? And things like that, right? But that would also mean that the app developer of tomorrow may not necessarily be even creating apps for a phone, because the future interface for a phone may not be a phone, right? It may be a glasses, right? You might be making calls with your glasses, and you might be making your AR and VR interactions, right? Using glasses as well, right? And goggles, because the form factor of it will be so slim, right? That it'd be quite a seamless thing, right? To actually wear and then, go around with it. So what that means is that you can do a lot of other forms of application, like first person view, control of drones, right? Which is already happening, right? So now we are talking about FPV drone racing, or you will even have inspection of buildings and sites, using drones, with the goggles and everything, or even remote controlling, right, of your factory production line, or remote controlling of a robotic arm, remote surgery, telemedicine, or even a construction site. You can remotely control your excavator, right? Which actually happened in China already. There's some trials that's happening doing that, right? So you can imagine the use case is going to explode, all right, when you start developing applications for 5G, right? And we can see that 2021 is going to be the year in which 5G adoption will literally take off, right? And if we are to project project this out to all the way to 2025 in terms of how this is distributed, you will notice that Asia Pac is going to lead in the whole rise of 5G, right? And in fact, in terms of the devices and the capability of 5G, Asia is the market leader at this point in time. Right? In fact, China is leading in that, which is why there was the whole trade war issue, and there's the Huawei issue that happened, right? Because of that, right? So you see that the next few innovation, right, that will arise from 5G adoption is going to come out of Asia Pac, right? Especially from China, as well as even Korea, and maybe even Singapore itself, right? So I think that is something that's very exciting, and I'd like to conclude by saying that with all these different key trends, right, even though I've kind of explained each of the key trends individually, I think you can envisage a use case where all of these key trends come together in a very integrated manner, right? So as an app developer of tomorrow, all right, actually there's a lot more things that you then need to look into, right, beyond just doing a normal, app that people are used to today, right? So thank you, and if you have any questions and answer, I'd be happy to answer them right now.
All right. Thank you so much, Vincent, for your very interesting talk, and also a very visionary and a very futuristic look as to what the trends are going to be. And who knows, maybe an app will not look like a mobile app in the future. So we're just going to wait a while people ask and put any questions they have on the chat, the text chat on YouTube. In the meanwhile, I will share the screen for the feedback, the QR code for the feedback, and see if anyone has any feedback that they want to share. I'll just put my slide up here. So maybe let's start off with a question. So you have mentioned about the convergence, I think, between AR, VR, what we call XR, and mobile. So what's your opinion? Do you think that will be the killer use case based on your experience for maybe this killer app feature that will combine mobile and AR and VR? Just any thoughts do you have based on what you've seen so far, or what has been requested in the industry?
Sure. So actually, if you guys are interested in XR, just out of
Very
coincidence,
interested.
actually last week I did one session like this for a poly as well, and the topic was on XR, right? So we covered everything to do with XR. I think the interesting thing about XR is that it is still a very nascent and kind of a development, right? But the fact that your Google and your Apple has already made the AR development kit something that is native within the operating system, right? Kinds of signal that they are very bullish about this, and they feel that in time to come, there'll be a lot of other things they will want to roll out, right? So if you are very interested in XR, I would advise that you start by looking at just AR alone and looking at the AR development kits, like the AR Core for Android and the AR kit for iOS as a starting point, right? Before you look into the other things like your VR and everything. The other thing about this is also how well has this AR and VR been incorporated into your web browser. That's also equally important, because as I mentioned earlier on, not everybody wants to download yet an app, and a lot of times things are discovered first on the browser. AR and web, AR web and VR web is still very new. The compatibility is beginning to be there, but it's still not fully compatible yet. But I think we'll reach a stage where this will be something that is very seamless, right? Where you could literally do this on your web browser without even telling whether this is an app or a web in the first place, right? I think that is what's going to happen. And of course, not to discount the fact that Apple and Google are both trying to develop their own glasses. And Facebook themselves also say they're going to launch one end of this year. I'm not sure whether it will happen or not, right? So it'd be interesting to see whether these companies might even purposely cannibalize their own product, right? Just to come up with a new way of doing application. And they have done it before, right? Because when Apple launched iPhone, they literally built iPhone incrementally from the iPod. And that cannibalized the earlier product, which is the iPod, right? They don't sell the iPod anymore. So I wouldn't be surprised if they actually do that, right? And then in future, all these app developer of the phone will end up developing for glasses instead.
Yeah, and just the observation that pretty much they are the same hardware under the hood. Pretty much like an example is the Oculus Quest. It runs Android on the inside,
Yes,
and pretty
exactly.
much the same chipset as a phone, but maybe only 2 screens. So we really are very interested to see what could potentially happen in the future. So on the same note, regarding the new wrapper toolkits that we have seen out there, and also for Google and Apple as well, there's a rise of a lot of these. As you mentioned, a change from Cordova and Ionic, and from these running everything in a web view to now having a native wrapper for JavaScript, for example, React Native, and now with Dart and Flutter. Google has this habit of pretty much canning technologies based on these examples. What's your thought, or what's your opinion about the usage of such wrapper toolkits? So for me personally, I struggle with this for teaching mobile applications, because I've been in this area for I think about more than like 10 years or so. I hate to say this, but I developed when there was Symbian and when there was Palm, so you know my age now. Yeah, so how long do you think they will last, or what do you think will be the trend that will change? Maybe like, should we move everything to Flutter? Google has this habit of like canning stuff, and then you can see that people are having trouble with React Native right now, as not a lot of wrappers are being written and updated for the latest API. Any thoughts or any opinions?
Sure. So I think this is actually one of the inevitable trend of our industry. Because truth be told, if you had to look back, a decade or so, a lot of the things that we used to do no longer exist, right? Like how Flash got killed, right? And things like that, right? People used to do that on Flash, in the past before HTML5 came about. So I do understand you from an educator point of view. It's very hard to say, let's go with one framework and teach that, and then, it can after that, right? In fact, because I teach at NUS as well, that was one of the problems we faced, right? We wanted to teach something full stack, and then we say, oh, maybe we do Angular JS, and then and then after they roll out an Angular 2 is nowhere like Angular 1, and then it becomes so convoluted and everything, right? So I think what's important, it's not about which framework to choose or what to teach based on the framework, but acknowledge the fact that the framework will have to change and get refreshed all the time. But the underlying knowledge behind how the system works, right, has to be the foundation behind it, right? Because if it was Ionic, in fact, ironically, we actually taught Ionic previously, and then we actually switched to React Native, right? And what do we then pick to choose, right? We could have directly, pivoted to Dart and Flutter instead, right? We, as educators, we would then need to always look at the industry. Yeah, that's the unfortunate fact. Because as an industry, then you will need to see what are the industry demands. If the industry is demanding for more React Native engineers, if they are looking at it from a wider community point of view, right? If I'm to compare that, then we have no choice but to pick that, right, in the curriculum itself, right? And that's precisely why we put React Native, because right now React Native it's still leading in terms of the number of packages available and things like that. Now, obviously, Flutter and Dart has a lot of advantages. In fact, some of the packages that they have, I would argue, is better maintained, right, than React Native, right? And React Native right now also have the other issue of the fact that there was one time, as you know, because this is by Facebook, right? So there is always the whole legality portion, right? Which is often it's quite overlooked, in fact, because people usually tend not to read the fine prints. So when people started using React Native, they didn't realize that actually there was a clause that said that there are some parts which is not that open, and if you're building on top of it, some of the things actually belongs to Facebook, right? So people made a lot of hoo-ha about it, and then they realized that, oh shit, but okay, in the end, Facebook has no choice. They changed the licensing and they updated that already. But there is always that problem, right, that lies behind it. And of course, the other problem is like what you mentioned, Google, Facebook, canning the project altogether, right? I think that one is cannot be avoided, right? If they feel that the project is going nowhere, like what Adobe did to PhoneGap, right? Then you just need to jump ship, even before they can it, right? If you realize, if you were on PhoneGap previously, all right, or if I was on PhoneGap previously, I would have already jumped ship 3 or 4 years or even more, or 5 years ago, even before they say that they reaches the end of life, because you can kind of tell, right, in terms of industry demand as well as how active the community has become, or inactive is become, so to speak.
Yeah. So we also had the same problem here, and certain things I will have to say that will never change for mobile application development, and that will be multi-threaded development, being able to develop optimized and efficient applications no matter what the API is, and generally what's going on inside the operating system stack, which I covered in lecture 1 and 2. So we have a couple of questions from the floor, so let me read them off. So one question is that will data rate limiting from ISPs be an issue for 5G? What do you think?
Okay, so this is a very political question actually, because yeah, it's true, because that is the reason why the whole fight over 5G began between US and China, right? Because imagine if the equipment, deployed by ISP and everything, what the underlying factor here is saying that is that, the data, privacy is one issue, but the other issue is, of course, even if privacy part is not an issue, just by limiting the rate, right, or even censoring it, all right, can give rise to a lot of different potential issue, right? So if, let's say, for example, if the ISP, kind of like got in bed with Facebook or something like that, right? They could purposely, give all the data and bandwidth towards Facebook related kind of applications, and you can end up having the fact that your Oculus, because it's Facebook owned, right, will work better, than whatever applications that's done on the HTC Hive, or other applications, right? So this will definitely be an issue altogether. Yeah, but I don't think this is a technical thing that we can solve actually. It's more of a policy thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that also ties in with all the questions about net neutrality
Yeah.
and the other things as well. Okay, and we have time for one more question. So let's ask one more question. So there's a question about 3D scanning as part of mobile phones, and how will this impact development and the mobile phone feature? So you know that especially with the new iPhones, they do have the ability to be able to do a little bit of 3D point scanning as well. So what do you think?
I think for 3D scanning, okay, so this is something that kinds of irritates the normal consumer, all right? Because when Apple, especially when they rolled the phone, they say like all these features, right? And then they say that the price is now $2,000 or something like that. then everyone was like saying, oh, but do we actually need all this fancy stuff, right? When your price of the phone is going to jerk up because of that, right? But of course, if you're wearing the developer hat, right, then you're happy that the fact that there is now a way in which you could then tap onto data that is previously not accessible, because the ability to have depth, right, visual depth, right, so to speak, is actually a very important thing to have, right? Because if you look at Pokemon Go, for example, all right, the AR view of the Pokemon, all right, they are now able to, of course, show the Pikachu, run and step on the floor and everything. And you literally have a sense of proportionality, right? In terms of how big should the thing is, depending on how far or how close you are to that AR object. This actually gives a more genuine feel in terms of how you view the AR to be, all right? But this is only just the beginning, right? Because this is only looking at it from a game point of view. Now, if you move away from the game point of view and look into practical usages, like then you can start seeing things like your IKEA app, where you could literally place a furniture before you even make a purchase, right? Because sometimes you're not sure whether this furniture works well in your home or not. So you can usually use that, and you can have that sense of depth and kind of look and configure, and plan a whole house even before you even really buy that physical object. So I think the 3D scanning part is really important in terms of all this utility. But I think the limitation right now is still the price point, right? Because if the price is not going to come down, then people are not willing to pay that extra for that feature in the phone just to have these features, to be rolled out in terms of 3D scanning. Yeah.
Yeah, I do admit that the price is pretty much a huge consideration for people, and a lot of people are pretty used to the $0 phone offer right now, Singtel package and all that. But if you talk about VR and AR, I'm also pretty looking forward to the Niantic AR headset, which is supposed to be able to be played with Pokemon and with Pogo and Ingress as well. Okay, we have time for one last question. We see one pop up. Okay, one last one. So this comes from our instructor check. Given the experience with a broad configuration of mobile device stacks, what app architecture does your company endorse? Do you endorse a specific application architecture?
Just to be clear, are you referring to just the front end stack, or you're talking about the entire full stack?
I think it's the entire full stack, maybe the internal organization. Yeah, what is recommended, or maybe what do you think?
So I would say that in terms of industry practices, and as I mentioned, because of the cost factor in one of my earlier slides, there's a tendency to go full stack on just JavaScript based kind of a framework, which means that you have your React Native on your mobile side, your React JS on your web, and then you have your Node.js on your backend, right? And the reason why we will go with that, right, is because there is a lot of a resource saving that you can get, right? When you can literally have full stack engineers who are very proficient in JavaScript, having good understanding of both backend and front end, and then they can code, both the application front end and backend interchangeably, right? And if you look at the kind of applications that clients look out for these days, a lot of them are not rocket science kind of a app, right? So there is really no need for them to pay that extra dollar or even the extra time, right, to spend to market just to go pure native, right? So as a result of that, that's why you will find that industry point of view, most people gravitate right towards a JavaScript kind of a stack. Yeah.
Okay, I see. So seems like Clubhouse is a bit of a outlier here.
Oh, Clubhouse is unique. I mean, there are some unique cases, like our medical clients, for example. Because of the BLE beacons and the BLE connection, and everything. Yeah, you have to go native, right? So there are some instances where React Native is kind. But what I'm saying is that 70% or even 80% of the time, it's you don't need that kind of functionality. Yeah.
All right. Okay, cool. All right. I think that's all the time we have today. Again,
I was going to ask one question too.
Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Can I?
No problems. Yeah, go ahead.
No problem.
I always have to get the last question in. First of all, Vincent, thanks a lot for joining us and for contributing this wonderful talk to our students. It's been very enjoyable. So just to wrap up, my question here is about the future of mobile operating systems. Obviously, we're firmly entrenched in an Android and iOS world. 99% of the mobile devices run one of those operating systems. However, with some of the trends we've seen recently, like Huawei, and the UOJ in America, sanctions against them, they've been creating their own mobile operating system, and we're seeing a small but spirited trend towards Linux-based phones starting to take a root. So what do you think going down the road? Is there going to be a shift in the power balance in the operating system for mobile devices? And what's the best way that developers, mobile developers can prepare themselves and future-proof themselves for that? Thank you.
Sure. I think this depends on your market as well. Truth be told, the operating system actually doesn't matter as much depending on which industry you're targeting and which market you're targeting. So I'll give you an example. If you are very interested in the Chinese market, would you even worry about the operating system? Because the first thing I would do is I would create a WeChat mini app instead, right? Because the WeChat ecosystem there is that big in terms of its proliferation, so much so that everyone is using the WeChat app itself, right? So it makes a better sense, to simply just do a WeChat mini program, put it within the ecosystem, and that's it. Doesn't matter what operating system they use. So I think at the end of the day, right, it will then boils down to where you feel your market should be, right? If you think that is very important for you to be in that market, then obviously you need to adopt whatever operating system is coming in. But before you jump into that heavy investment of building apps for yet another operating system, look at what other ways in which you can enter the market, right? In the case of China, of course, you've got WeChat, right? Yeah, so you can always have alternatives.
Great. Yeah, the part you mentioned about the progressive web app, progressive apps there. That sounds like that would be one way to insulate yourself to these changes, right? Because these tend to be more portable than the native apps, of course.
Yep, exactly.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Vincent.
Yep. Just wanted to add that I did take a look at it. The Huawei Harmony operating system is actually an Android AOSP fork. So it's actually not a lot different under the hood, and pretty much every single thing, every OS is generally Linux or Debian-based operating systems clone. So if you guys got your OS and operating systems module right, I think that you would have most of the fundamentals that's needed for learning about mobile operating systems. So I just jailbroke one of the phones yesterday night, and I saw pretty much the jailbreaking app install a couple of apt-get packages as well as a couple of Debian packages as well to get it going, to get the exploit going on the iOS device. So yeah.
And I think the other thing is because these other players are playing catch up, I would say they will definitely create tools and ways for you to port existing app over. They won't leave you on a lurch and just to write everything over, right? So I'm pretty sure they will come up with maybe even plugins for your IDE, and since it was a fork of Android, they could easily create something for you to sort of migrate your app over from Android, over to the operating system. Yeah.
Yeah, most probably. Okay, Scott, any more questions? No more?
No more. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Vincent, thank you so much. It's been a very interesting and enlightening talk, and we really enjoyed it, and we really appreciate your time. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And for those people watching at home, okay, I'll see you guys tomorrow. No more questions, right? Okay. Bye, guys.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
Bye.
you. Yeah.
You.
Bye-bye.